Welcome back to the silky tones of Christian on the mic. I'm your host, Christian. And tonight it is A Wizard of Earthsea, Chapter 6, Part 3. The last sentence spoken by Jed. What man are you? A traveler, a trader's agent from Osskill. I am here on business, said the man in gray. When Jed asked him no more, he quietly bade the young man good night and went off up the narrow-stepped street above the quays. Jed turned, irresolute whether to heed this sign or not, and looked to the north. The red light was dying out from the far hills and from the windy sea. Gray dusk came, and on its heels, night. Jed went in sudden decision and haste along the quays to a fisherman who was folding his nets down in his dory, and hailed him. Do you know any ship in this port bound north, to Samel or the Enlades? The long ship's yonder from Osskill. She might be stopping at the Enlades. In the same haste, Jed went on to the grey ship the fisherman had pointed to, a long ship of 60 oars, gaunt as a snake, her high bent brow carven and inlaid with discs of loto shell, her oar ports covered with red, with the rune Siffle sketched on each plank. A grim, swift ship she looked, and all in sea trim, with all her crew aboard. Jed sought out the ship's master and asked passage to Osskill for him. Can you pay? I have some skill with winds. I am a weather worker myself. You have nothing to give, no money? In Low Torning, the Islemen had paid Jed as best they could with the ivory pieces used by traders in the archipelago. He'd only take 10 pieces, though they wanted to give him more. He offered these now to the Osskillian, but he shook his head. We do not use those counters. If you have nothing to pay, I have no place aboard for you. Do you need arms? I have rowed in a galley. Aye, we're short 2 men. Find your bench then, said the ship's master, and paid him no more heed. So, laying his staff and his bag of books under the rower's bench, Jed became for 10 bitter days of winter an oarsman of the northern ship. They left Ormy at daybreak, and that day Jed thought he could never keep up his work. His left arm was somewhat lamed by the old wounds in his shoulder, and all his rowing in the channels about Low Torning had not trained him for the relentless pull and pull and pull at the long galley oar to the beat of the drum. Each stint at the oars was of 2 or 3 hours, and then a second shift of oarsmen took the benches. But the time of rest seemed only long enough for all of Jed's muscles to stiffen, and then it was back to the oars. And the second day of it was worse, but after that he hardened to the labor and got on well enough. There was no such comradeship among this crew as he had found aboard the Shadow when he first went to Roke. The crewmen of the Andradian and Gontish ships are partners in the trade, working together for a common profit, whereas traders of Osskill use slaves and bondsmen or hire men to row, paying them with small coins of gold. Gold is a great thing in Osskill, but it is not a source of good fellowship there, or amongst the dragons, who also prize it highly. Since half this crew are bondsmen, forced to work, the ship's officers were slave masters, and harsh ones. They never laid their whips on the back of an oarsman who had worked for pay or passage, but there will not be much friendliness in a crew of whom some are whipped and others are not. Jed's fellows said little to one another, and less to him. They were mostly men of Osskill, speaking not the Hardic tongue of the archipelago, but a dialect of their own, and they were dour men, pale-skinned with black, drooping mustaches and lank hair. Caleb, the Red One, was Jed's name. Caleb, meaning the Red One, was Jed's name among them. Though they knew he was a wizard, they showed him no regard, but rather a kind of cautious spitefulness, and he himself was in no mood for making friends. Even on his bench, caught up in the mighty rhythm of the rowing, one oarsman among 60 in a ship racing over void gray seas, he felt himself exposed, defenseless. When they came into strange ports at nightfall, and he rolled himself in his cloak to sleep, weary as he was, he would dream, wake, dream again, evil dreams that he could not recall waking, though they seemed to hang about the ship and the men of the ship, so that he mistrusted each of them. All the Osskillian freemen wore a long knife at the hip, and one day, as his oarships shared their noon meal, one of these men asked Jed, "Are you a slave or oathbreaker, Caleb?" "Neither." "Why no knife then? Afraid to fight?" said the man, Skior, jeering. "No." "Your little dog fight for you?" "Otok," said another man who listened. "No dog. That is an Otok." And he said something in Osskillian that made Skior scowl and turn away. Just as he turned, Jed saw a change in his face, a slurring and shifting of the features, as if for a moment something had changed him, used him, looking out through his eyes sidelong at Jed. Yet the next minute, Jed saw him full face, and he looked as usual, so that Jed told himself that what he had seen was his own fear, his own dread reflected in the other's eyes. But that night, as they lay in port in Essen, he dreamed, and Skior walked in his dreams. Afterwards, he avoided the man as best he could, and it seemed also that Skior kept away from him, and no more words passed between them. The snow-crowned mountains of Havnor sank away behind them southward, blurred by the mists of early winter. They rode on past the mouth of the Sea of Ia, where long ago Elfarin was drowned, and past the Enlades. They lay 2 days in the port of Barilla, the city of ivory, white above its bay in the west of myth-haunted Enlad. At all ports they came to, the crewmen were kept aboard the ship and set no foot on land. Then, as a red sun rose, they rowed out on the Osskill Sea into the northern winds that blow unhindered from the islandless vastness of the northern reach. Through that bitter sea they brought their cargo safe, coming the second day out of Barilla into the port of Neshum, the trade city of eastern Osskill. Jed saw a low coast lashed by rainy wind, a gray town crouching behind a long stone breakwall that made its harbor, and behind the town, treeless hills under a snow-darkened sky. They had come far from the sunlit isles of the inmost sea. Longshoremen of the Sea Guild of Neshum came aboard to unload the cargo. Gold, silver, jewelry, fine silks and southern tapestries, such precious stuff as the lords of Osskill hoard. And the freemen of the crew were dismissed. Jed stopped one of them to ask his way. Up until now, the distrust he felt of all of them had kept him from saying where he was bound. But now, afoot and alone in a strange land, he must ask for guidance. The man went on impatiently, saying he did not know, but Skior, overhearing, said, "The court of the Terranon? the court of the Terranon, and the Kecksmith Moors. I go that road. Skiors was no company Jed would have chosen, but knowing neither the language nor the way, he had small choice. Nor did it much matter, he thought. He had not chosen to come here. He had been driven, and now was driven on. He pulled his hood up over his head, took up his staff and bag, and followed the Osgilian through the streets of the town and upward into the snowy hills. The little Otok would not ride on his shoulder, but hid in the pocket of his sheepskin tunic, under his cloak, as it was wont in cold weather. The hills stretched out into bleak, rolling moorlands as far as the eye could see. They walked in silence, and the silence of winter lay heavy on the land. That's all for tonight, my bear, my river. You know what I'll say, to find peace and deep rest, and that I'll see you in my dreams. But tonight, know that I mean it especially, and that I will see you there. Good night.